describe your job now? You're not a police officer any longer.
No, that's right.
But you've not stopped working. So what is your job?
I am somebody who believes that without a purpose, I will perish. And so I need to have something in my life that matters.
Agreed. I am with you 100%.
There you go.
Yeah.
So as I evolved from somebody who stopped being a police officer, I've seen this need, and I've seen the fact that I believe I have some understanding about how I can meet the need for police officers around dealing with trauma.
But the only way that you can do this is if you have the appropriate amount of credibility. You had to have had long years of service as a police officer and as a leader, a police chief, to actually be able to have the insight and credibility that's needed to do that. So let's go back to the beginning of your career as a police officer. Where'd you start?
Well, gosh and golly. So this is 1980 is when I signed up, and my poor wife thought she was marrying a lawyer. I was in law school at the time we tied the knot, and had lovely long hair, and I had it all shorn off when I decided that I was going to be a police officer, and she wouldn't even walk beside me because I looked pretty horrible compared to this cool dude that she thought she was hooking up with.
With the flowing long hair.
That's right.
Yeah.
When I was in law school, I spent a summer with the RCMP. They had a special program for law students, and I spent 4 months as a special constable and was lit up by it. And then I went and did my articles and was depressed by it. I liked law school, but I didn't enjoy trying to be a lawyer. And so my wife said, why don't you go and do what you figured out you loved? Which is pretty incredible advice. And so
For somebody who thought she was marrying a lawyer.
That's right. That's right. Well,
what? I'm going to give up on all the riches of being a lawyer.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the supposed riches of being a lawyer.
Well, and not somebody who worries about that. She was good with it if it made me happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I'm going to try this. And so I said to myself, for 3 years, I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. And so I applied to the Vancouver Police and was hired. I was 2 inches under the mandatory height.
And you were still hired.
Yeah, I wrote a little letter of exemption saying I went to school for a long time. Will you hire me anyway? And they did. And so I went out there on the street, and I know this is politically incorrect, but my nickname was the albino dwarf because I've never had a tan, and I was 2 inches shorter than any other police officer, male police officer in the Vancouver Police. And everybody looked at me and did a short joke. I knew quite a few short jokes at one point in my life. But
well, you point to the fact that it's politically incorrect, but that was part of the environment that you were moving into.
Absolutely.
But I guess it also plays a role in leading you to where you are today, because you go, that kind of culture isn't the sort of culture that is supportive.
Right. And I would say back in 1980, I'm still a white male.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were different in other ways, ethnically different, a female, gay, or a member of the LGBTQ community, this was
not a chance.
Yeah, really tough. And there were women who were making it, but they were dealing with a lot more crap than I was.
Yeah.
And so 1980 is not something to be proud of when it came to policing and those issues of looking after each other.
Yeah, but you have also been a part of, by your very participation, the transformation that is underway.
Sure.
We're seeing a different culture emerge.
Absolutely.
You know, a police department back then was probably closer to being a somewhat paramilitary organization.
Absolutely.
Rather than a service department that is helping to keep a community safe, which I think, you know, is more the way that we're moving in policing, particularly here in British Columbia.
Absolutely. Peel's principles have always been there.
Yes.
They might have been a little forgotten for a while.
Yeah.
We may have lost our way for a while. But I think we're finding our way back to what it is we ought to be.
For anybody who doesn't know, you're talking about Sir Robert Peel.
Sir Robert Peel of the Bobbies.
Yes, named after him. Yes.
That's right.
Unless, of course, you're in Ireland, where they're called peelers.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that. That's good.
Didn't you? Oh, no. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he and his people got it right that we need to connect to the community, and that means being somebody who cares and somebody who helps people when they're hurting and understands that they're not different than the people they serve, really.
So you were a police officer on patrol with the Vancouver Police Department.
Absolutely.
How many years did you do that?
So I was not that many years in patrol. That law degree pulled
Helped
me into
you.
different places, I suppose. Yeah, it pulled me off the street a little bit. I ended up doing some work as a legal advisor in the chief constable's office for a while. So I learned a lot about how the place was run just as a very young officer.
Yep.
Still next or near to the people that were running the department and learned a lot from them. And early in my career, I was encouraged to run to be a union director. And so I got involved in the union side, which is a different kind of leadership structure that looks after members and is important. And the Western police unions are very professional and very supportive of their departments, and the relationship has been very good in the Western provinces. And so it was a positive experience to be involved in that. But the politics of policing were certainly, I was exposed to that and learned a lot about how different things were happening. At one point, for a couple of years, I was the union president. So you're stepping into a leadership role at that point when you sit in that chair and trying to figure out how to look after your members and feel that responsibility.
So what were some of the other I don't want to say deployments, but that's a military term, but assignments that you had in your time at the VPD?
Yeah, so I couldn't hold a job. So the list is long and painful.
But doesn't every police officer, or most police officers, go through a rotation of different assignments?
I seem to do it more than some, but let's see. I was a corporal in charge working in the 911 dispatch area where we answered 911 and dispatch calls. And so I used a microphone lots during those months. And my first taste at leading a team in the policing world was a corporal back out on patrol. So that's a junior level supervisor on the road. I spent 2 years as a vice detective working in that dark underworld of prostitution and pimping and all of the really horrible stuff that's there, that darkness. And became a sergeant and worked in the downtown east side and patrol, which I loved. The downtown east side fascinates me. People without veneer, people who are real. That's the one very positive thing I'll say about the folks that you encounter there. And running a patrol team as a sergeant, best job ever. So that was pretty cool. I spent a little while trying to lead a surveillance team while I was the union president. Trying to do both things meant I was probably not doing great at either one.
Focus, yes.
Anyway, I was not the best surveillance officer on the planet. It's its own special skill, but that was cool to learn a bit about. And then I was eventually promoted to inspector, which is a manager, and a leader, and ran recruiting and training.
Wow.
So again, having a hand in who we were recruiting. One of the things I brought to that was that we were not getting rid of the people who weren't best suited to this work, and I actually brought in a process for removing people while they were on probation if they weren't the right person, something Vancouver wasn't good at the time. A weekend promotion, not promotion, I suppose, I don't know, but on Friday somebody told me on Monday I'm in charge of HR, so that's how the things work. Somebody left the organization and I became the head of HR for a period of time. And eventually was promoted to deputy chief. And under Jamie Graham, he was the RCMP officer who came in. And I asked Jamie if I could have the operations chair, even though a lot of my time had been on the admin side of the house. And he let me become the operations deputy chief. And that was one of the best jobs I could ever have as well.
Why? What made that such a good assignment?
I was somebody who had become a student of William Bratton, who was the commissioner of the NYPD in 1994. And the gentleman who developed with his Jack Maples, his deputy commissioner, ComStat. But the principle he stood for was this, and policing had lost its way, that they really weren't responsible for the crime rate, that was really up to social demographic determinants. But William Bratton said, actually, it turns out people are causing crime and they can be stopped. And he said, police department's job is to make a community safe, and you can do that. There are no excuses. I was a student of that. I'm like, we have lost our way. And so when I asked for that chair, it was so I could try out the principles. You had to do it differently than they did it in New York. And not everything went perfectly in New York. I'm not saying it did. But they dropped the crime rate in New York by 75% in the 90s. And so we began
transformed the city.
Yeah, totally did. It became a safe place to be, right? And it wasn't. In Manhattan, you couldn't go out at night, but now you can. And that makes such a difference to a community. And so for the Vancouver Police Department, our team began to work on that, and I got the chance to do those things. So that's why I wanted that chair, was to try that out.
And from there, how many years had you been with the police department, Vancouver Police Department, by that point?
Oh, when I got to that chair, maybe 22 years.
Okay.
So
what got you to Abbotsford?
Well, so fast forward, Jamie Graham retires or is retiring, and I'm competing for chief.
Mm-hmm.
And a wonderful colleague named Jim Chu is also competing for chief.
Mm-hmm.
And fair and square, the man wins the job. And we look at each other, and he says, I'm going to move you out of that spot. And I went, hang on to that. Maybe what the best thing would be is if I was somewhere else, because, love you, but I would like to be in the number one chair still.
Yeah.
And so I applied to go out to Abbotsford and to be the chief there.
There was an opening.
There was an opening, absolutely. The way it works.
So what year was that?
2008.
And you were in that position for how long?
10 years.
10 years. And you saw a tremendous amount of change happening in Abbotsford as a city. It was growing rapidly.
Absolutely.
Your police department's growing. It's becoming more complex. And then, of course, you encounter a whole series of challenges that, in many ways, I guess, changed the course of your career and your life.
The first challenges were fun. People think this is weird when I say it, but I went out to Abbotsford, and in 2008 and 2009, we were the murder capital of Canada. So on a per capita basis, people were getting whacked in our city, and it was all gang war based.
It wasn't indiscriminate crime. It was.
No, we weren't dealing with that. We were dealing with gangsters killing each other.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that also led to the death of Mr. Al, an innocent victim who around went through a fence. He's just putting out the garbage. So you're going to have innocent victims in that. It's not a nothing thing that people are shooting each other. So the Red Scorpions, the Bacon brothers, who were the head of that, who lived in Abbotsford on a quiet cul-de-sac in a nice area of the city with their parents. That's what I inherited when I walked out there.
Wow.
And so I took on the challenge of trying to figure out how to apply what Mr. Bratton said. You can make a community safe, and so away we went.
So how do you address the challenge of gang violence? Because there are other communities who are dealing with that very issue right now.
Well, there is no one perfect answer. It's not by staying inside the box. I promise you that.
Yeah.
If you have a look at internet, you can see the the Christmas cards I sent to gangsters at one point. I went a little viral when I dressed up in a Christmas suit and put my ERT tactical gear on top of that and asked the gangsters in a Christmas card that we sent them which list they wanted to be on this Christmas, whether they were going to be naughty or nice. So we did a lot of very fun things, but we, more seriously, we put a lot of effort into going to every school.
Yeah.
And presenting to the kids about what was going on and the truth about the gangs. And you have to be really honest and straightforward with kids and don't talk down to them about what they're facing. We actually tried to talk to all the parents of the school-age kids and to help them understand that their kids were being immersed in gang culture, the music, the games that they were playing to, the clothing that they wear, all were real components of being drawn into the gang world.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we created a gang squad and did a ton of work around arresting people. One year we executed over 100 search warrants. So we tried to come at it from a whole bunch of angles.
You were putting pressure on these people.
Absolutely. Our stated goal was this: Abbotsford is going to be a crappy place to live if you're a gangster.
And it worked.
It worked. We got rid of that. In 2011, we had no murders. Now,
wow.
As time went by,
pretty quickly.
Sure. As time went by, though, we entered into another gang war, and this time a little bit more focused in the South Asian community, and so we struggled in the last few years to take on. And you couldn't. There's no cookie cutter. You couldn't do the same things you did last time and expect the same result. You actually had to look at what was going on, what the dynamics were, and try different approaches to taking it on. And the new chief, who was my deputy chief at the time, has done an amazing job, because that operations deputy position, remember I talked to you about, that's why it was so cool in Vancouver. He has worked really hard to turn the story yet again in Abbotsford, and they're doing extremely well.
So for somebody who looks at you and thinks, okay, I want to be police chief and then maybe go on to do other things in the future, what would be elements of a career that you think would be essential to being able to take on the challenge of running a very complex department? Like, normally I ask people, well, what does a day look like when you're a chief or something like that? But it would be so complex, we'd be here for a few hours and still not cover it. I'm sure that it's, every department that there is. But for somebody who says, yeah, I want to aspire to that, what would you tell them?
I actually don't think it's that complicated compared to other organizations in this way. You run a police department well by creating a great team.
Yeah.
That team runs the police department. You walk in there and you think you're going to run it, you are going to fail. You walk in there and you begin to mentor and coach and bring up the right people and build a strong bench, you're gonna succeed. It's about the team.
Okay, not that I'm going to differ with you. It's just that you have to know that you're helping them make the right decisions to run their part of the team.
Absolutely.
And you can't do that without knowing what's going on there
Absolutely.
or having experience.
Totally. Yeah. And so, so let me answer part of your question.
Yeah.
Monday morning, 8:00, the team and I walk into the building together, and we begin to go through what's going on in the organization. We have an informal meeting where anybody can bring up anything, and then we have a formal meeting with minutes taken about making decisions on various issues. And in between that, lots of informal discussion about what's going on in each area of the department. And I have lots of ability to have input during those times. But I try not to step in. Like, if you are running your part of the department, you're doing it ethically and morally and correctly, and you've got an idea for solving a problem, I try never to step on that. I want that person to run their part of the department. And so I'm aware of it. As long as they're following the principles, it's moral, it's ethical, it's legal, they've got the right goal in mind, then away they go.
Yes. So that's the inward-facing side of an organization, which is probably not too different than most complex organizations.
Exactly.
But as police chief, you also have an outward-facing responsibility.
Absolutely.
Politicians, educators,
Right.
The community at large,
Right.
criminals. They're all looking at you saying, okay, what are you doing?
Yep.
And how do you meet those challenges as well?
Yeah. Learn who your stakeholders are, and you meet with them. For me to develop a close relationship with the school superintendent, who happened to be an amazing fellow, we worked in partnership in so many different ways. One of the basic principles and it's following Peel again, but one of the basic principles for solving an issue is to do it as a community, not as a police department. So a great example is the fentanyl crisis that we're facing, and how many people were dying from that. And so we looked at ourselves and went, well, a few people got murdered last year, but 50 people died of drug overdoses. Like, what's our real issue here? And so Mike Sear created, this is the deputy chief, who's now the chief, creates a working group with Fraser Health and the schools and Abbotsford Community Services and all these people, and brings them into a room and says, how do we fix this? And they've created an angel program that the police department's running, where they now have peer mentors who the police officer can introduce to somebody who wants to get off the street, who wants to solve the problem. And this person's job is to lead them through Fraser Health and get the services they need. And Fraser Health is a partner in that. And so he created this whole program working with everybody in the community. And that's an essential part for a police department. I believe police need to see the issue, lead often the response, but need to involve all those key partners to doing it. We were working with the school where all these South Asian kids are being pulled into the gang world, and how do we stop that from happening? And so with the school's help, we've created a mentorship program for the kids who are most at risk, linking them with mentors from the community. And so now these kids who maybe didn't have a strong in this case, male role model in their life, suddenly have this guy who's phoning them every week and taking them for coffee or shooting some hoops with them and saying, how's it going? What's going on? Who's bugging you? How can I support you? And it's transforming lives in that way, which is not a traditional police response to a problem, is it? But that's how you do it.
Right. So when you look back over your career, what were the essential elements that put you in the appropriate position to be one in line for the position of chief in Vancouver, and ultimately in Abbotsford? What do you think were those things that were important as far as your own development and opportunities that you decided to take?
So I teach a course on leadership at this point, and trying to figure out what that means. A leader is not a person of rank. A leader might have rank. You're kind of hoping that a person who's got that rank, happens to be a leader.
Because they have authority with it as well, then, yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
When I look back and try to understand what I went through, I realized that I began to try to lead at a very early age in my career. And so that what allowed me to get promoted was the fact that I was always trying to figure out how to solve the next problem.
Yeah.
And so I actually, as part of that course, teach people the power of the 2-page memo, how to ask their organization to fix a problem by pointing it out in a clear document, and advocating for a change. Even as a sergeant or a constable, you can change an organization. And so if you begin to lead from the beginning and continue to develop that part of your skills, the promotions will come.
Is wrapped up in that a willingness to take on responsibility?
Yes. And attached to that is the willingness to take risk.
Yes.
Different kind of risk. A police officer on the street
Different, yeah. That's a
takes
different-
that risk. The kind of risk that you're talking about, a lot of people fear how other people are going to talk about them or look at them if they put themselves forward. So you have to acknowledge that and be willing to face that fear, and you have to be willing to fail.
Yeah,
Because-
because it's a career risk.
Right, but
Yeah.
but there is no success without failure, and so stepping forward and having it not work and saying, okay, that didn't work, let's try this, or I'm going to try to go for promotion, I didn't get it, okay, so what do you think I should do next, and how can I improve myself? So you're always trying to do that, but I have just found that by trying to lead wherever I was and trying to make things better for everybody, the opportunities seem to be there when you put your name forward. You had some good stories to tell, like about how you were trying to run the organization or help it.
Well, even in retirement from police, the business of being a police officer, you're leading once again because you're saying, I think that there's a better way. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing this, and thank you for everything you've done in your remarkable career.
Great having a chance to talk with you, Stu. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.